Hello, Connecticut, and welcome to the Paid Leave Podcast. The title basically says it all. I'm Nancy Barrow, and I will be delving into this new state program and how it can help you and your family. This podcast will give you information you should know about Connecticut paid leave and maybe just a little bit more. Connecticut paid leave brings peace of mind to your home, family, and workplace. Welcome to the Paid Leave Podcast. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Domestic violence affects everyone from every socioeconomic and cultural, ethnic, gender, and racial background. And whether you call it family violence or domestic violence or intimate partner violence, it's a really serious problem in Connecticut. There was a report out this week that said shelters have been housing victims at 150% of their capacity, and organizations have had to even find hotel rooms to help address the lack of space. And that's because reports of domestic violence spiked during COVID and continue to grow long after the lockdowns have been lifted. In Connecticut, 1/3 of all criminal court cases involve domestic violence. The family violence provisions that Connecticut Paid Leave offers to eligible workers in Connecticut includes 12 days of income replacement, along with the Family Violence Leave Act that offers 12 days of job protection for these reasons: to seek medical care or psychological or other counseling for physical or psychological injury or disability for the victim, to obtain services for a victim services organization on behalf of the victim, to move or relocate due to such family violence, and to participate in any civil or criminal court proceeding relating to or resulting from such family violence. And joining me to talk about navigating the court system is Jennifer Lopez, not the singer. She is the Director of Court Advocacy Programs for Interval House in Hartford. Jennifer's worked for about 30 years on behalf of domestic violence victims in the court systems, both in criminal and civil proceedings. Welcome to the podcast, Jennifer.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thanks so much for being here. We have Jane Doe also joining. She's a domestic violence survivor who has gone through both the criminal and the civil proceedings and is still immersed in the courts, so we can't really get into too many specifics about her case. But thanks for being on the podcast.
Happy to be here.
Well, Jennifer, tell me a little bit about what makes Interval House so special.
Well, we're definitely very special. We're the largest domestic violence program in the state of Connecticut, and that's because we cover Hartford and 23 towns surrounding Hartford. We have the largest volume of clients coming through the criminal court process, and as well as have the largest amount of police departments that we collaborate with. So we actually very comprehensive services. All information that we share is free and confidential. We don't judge anyone. We encourage people to call us. And one thing that I also want to say about Interval House, that we're really dedicated to ending domestic violence. We know maybe that will never happen, but we're going to fight as much as we can to make sure that we give it a try.
You know, I know that COVID really was sort of an instigator, right, for at least the reports. And there was a lot more reports of domestic violence during COVID because everybody was home, and that's a dangerous place sometimes. But it's still continuing now. I mean, everything is full at capacity. Why do you think that it is now at this point where the shelters are all full?
I think, when COVID hit, you're right, a lot of the victims and survivors were home. It was one more stress that added to what was going on already. The safety concerns became worse because they were home with the abusers, some of them. And I think that there was such a long period of time between when it started and now where in criminal court there were cases that were dormant. There was nothing going on. The civil court process kind of stopped. So now, this past year is when everything got opened up. And we had a floodgates coming in of cases that were kind of just being dormant. And to be honest, I think we're still trying to catch up a little bit. We had victims calling for updates. We didn't have them. We had victims calling saying, I called the police. They didn't make an arrest because they were told, to limit the arrest because they were overloaded in the prisons. So a lot of things kind of went still for a couple of years. And now we're just kind of getting back to what we can call a little bit of a norm. For victims, they're still afraid. COVID is not really gone, and there's still a lot of things that they're dealing with that they couldn't deal with in those 2 years that COVID was here. I just want to say an example was we have support groups for survivors, which we're very proud of, and we didn't have them during COVID. we didn't want to let them go. So we tried doing virtual support groups. We tried doing phone calls. And we found that it was very challenging because the kids were home. If you go out of the house, you might be able to get a babysitter. But when you're home, you are the babysitter. And we had a really hard time having survivors concentrate on the support groups when the kids were running around.
Yeah.
So they couldn't participate in the support groups. Nobody really thought of that dynamic.
You would think that the virtual might work.
We thought it might be easier, maybe more comfortable. It wasn't. And indeed, some of the abusers were home. I also want to make a disclaimer. In my language, talking about victims, I will use the pronoun she and her, because the reality is most of the victims that I work with, survivors, are women being abused by men. Not to say that men are not abused. We provide services as well, but the majority of victims we work with are women.
And also with the LGBTQ plus community, you're dealing with a lot of different kind of relationships as well.
Absolutely.
How many civil and criminal proceedings do you cover with Interval House? I mean, I know that you have court advocates.
Last year in the criminal courts, we dealt with more than 4,000 victims. In Hartford court on a Monday, in the criminal court, they can get anywhere between 10 to 30 cases because of the weekend. Throughout the week, at least 5 to 10 a day. And in a month, easy over 100. We have victim advocates that are so busy that are usually trying to, catch up the next day. Not to say that we don't take the time with the survivors to provide information and the support, but it's a huge challenge because of the volume of clients that we get. But the criminal court process, even though complicated and scary, is a little bit quicker than the family court process. That can take on years and years and years because it's very difficult when a victim goes into family court to be identified as a victim, therefore seeing the dynamics between an abuser and a victim. They're kind of assessed equally. So the time in the family court is a lot longer. The number...
when you say longer, how much? I know that it's not a one and done. Right?
No,
usually it's never a
unfortunately.
one and done.
Right. And that's because in the criminal court is the only place within the systems, and most of my work are within the systems, law enforcement, criminal court, immigration court, housing. In the criminal court is the only place that you're identified as a victim. And I hate to use the word victim.
Yeah, you want a survivor, right?
I want survivor, but the statistics and the language is a victim. Right. So you're identified as a victim by an arrest. So in criminal court is the only place that you have an actual victim identified. Nowhere else, not in housing court, not in the family court, only in the criminal court. So again, when you walk into the family court, you're not technically a victim. It's a he said, she said situation. In the criminal court, somebody said that you committed a crime. There's already an allegation there that's a victim and an offender. In the family court, there isn't. There could be a criminal case pending, but you're not in the same court. You're not in a different court. So victims and survivors struggle throughout the process to tell their story and be understood. And understand that there's different dynamics there. There's fear. There might be retaliation. There'd be so many different things that if you don't understand the dynamics between a victim and an abuser, there can be a lot of things that can go wrong with the process and the response to victims.
So I know in the criminal court you get a protective order, and in the civil court you get a restraining order.
Yes.
Can you tell me the difference between what those two things are? Are they different?
Thank you for asking that. There's a lot of restraining orders, protective order language out there. Yeah. The most common are the criminal protective orders and restraining orders. And the difference is that the protective order, there has to be an arrest to get one. Police has to be involved. There has to be an arrest. When you process through the court, you have an option to get one. However, you are going to get one in the criminal court, but you have a choice as to what level of protective order you get. You can get a no-contact order. No contact whatsoever, no phone calls, no emails, not even saying hello on the street. There could be a partial where you can talk to the victim, but you cannot be abusive to the victim. And there's also the staying away from the house. You can have contact with the victim or survivor anywhere on the street, anywhere she is, but you cannot come to the home. You can also include the children if the children are involved in the incident that the arrest took place. However, for the and they usually last as long as the case is pending. Mm-hmm. However, in the family court for the restraining order, something that you applied for. You actually go to court, do the application, get a hearing in 2 weeks, and you go to court and tell the judge your story, what happened, and hopefully the judge will understand and give you the restraining order. If they do, it's good for a year. You can also include the children and get temporary custody of your children. Through the restraining order process, you cannot do that through the protective order process. So you might have a victim who has a protective order who wants to include her children, so she might have to apply for a restraining order as well, and have both.
And get custody.
Exactly.
Because custody is in the civil court.
Yes.
And so is divorce?
Yes.
Okay. Are those also court cases that you, if it is in regards to the domestic violence issue, do you accompany them to those as well?
Yeah, we actually happen to have 2 full-time advocates in the family court in Hartford. And they do walk-ins, so anytime a victim walks in to get a restraining order, they are there to help with information. A lot of people seem to think that stepping out to get a restraining order, get a divorce, or call the police is the safe way to go.
Yeah.
Sometimes that opens the gates to retaliation. So it's not so easy to a victim or survivor to call the police and think, okay, I'm going to be okay. They do it in a minute of crisis because they want to be okay. And what happens very often is that they break the golden rule. They told somebody, and now there's retaliation or possible retaliation. That means that walking into the court, it's scary. You know, talking to people, it's scary. So the victim advocates are there to support and do safety planning with the victims. In the family court, in the family court with the restraining orders, it could lead to possible custody, long-term, and a divorce process. But they are 2 totally separate courts.
They are 2. Okay. And Jane, how did you navigate through these 2 courts? Because you went to both courts.
I did. And I just want to say the reason why I said I was happy to be here is because I'm a survivor, and unfortunately there are not survivors. And when I went to the court, to go along with your question, I got to meet with the victim's advocate. So the first thing you want to do when you get there is put your name on that sign-up sheet, meet with that victim's advocate for criminal and for family. And I know one day I went there and one of the victim's advocates was crying, and I said, "Are you okay?" She said one of the victim's advocate was crying because one of the victims that she knew in Hartford that got shot in the head had died. And you realize how close to home it is. And you realize that these people that are helping us, they know the people that you hear on the news.
And how did they help you get through the courts? Because that's really intimidating, I would imagine, going into a court and facing your abuser. How did they help you?
They sat behind me. And I remember I was before I'd got an attorney because, like Jennifer had just mentioned, you don't want to break the golden rule. You don't want to get an attorney. So you go in blind and you're like, I'll be fine. And they help navigate it. They encourage you. They tell you about the resources that are available to you. And they say, listen, you're not alone and we're right here. And sometimes it's just looking behind you and knowing that person has your back, literally.
Yeah. And I know that there's a stigma still attached to being a survivor / victim because, you know, when they use that language in the court, you feel like that, I'm sure. How has that stigma affected you?
Therapy. So therapy is really important. And I actually had a quote that my therapist had said to me. She said, you know, at one time you had forgot to love yourself. And it's not that you forgot, it's that you were told that you shouldn't love yourself. And it's because you don't know who yourself is anymore. And so with therapy, with the support groups that Jennifer mentioned, you know, there's one in Manchester on Wednesdays, there's one in Hartford on Tuesdays. You'll go and you will be scared, but then you're like, wow. And you start recognizing, and now it starts helping your emotional feelings and your wellness. And actually it's scary, but it's the best thing.
How are you and where are you in the court system? Are you done with criminal?
No, probably in a couple weeks. We hope to be done with criminal. There's still family. There's still divorce. You know, people say to me, why don't you sleep at night? Because you are a survivor, but you're still a victim. So there's a lot of things that keep you up at night.
Yeah. So you're having trouble still sleeping.
Oh, yeah. And it's hard because I'm 3rd generation. And you just have to say to yourself, like, you've got to stop. And people say, well, I don't understand why you didn't call 911 and why did the cops come and you didn't say anything. It's because of that trauma bond. That person has made you feel like you can't be without them. And in my instance, we both worked remote. We both were home. So that abuse was happening from day to night. And it was emotional, and then it turned physical.
And I thank you so much for being here.
Yeah,
I
we really
it takes a lot
appreciate
of
you talking.
courage
It sure does take a lot of courage because you're going to help somebody else, and that's what's really important. You're going to help another person going through this, and that's,
absolutely.
So, does it usually go from emotional to physical, or does there's no norm?
For what I've noticed, there's patterns, and I've done this work for 35 years, and I've stood next to survivors for hours in court. We have left the building sometimes crying and sometimes happy that we got custody after 5 years of fighting in court. But I want to clarify, sometimes the first sign that you don't even see is the charm. You first meet them and they're the best in the world. You don't go out on a date with an abuser who tells you, I'm going to beat you, and I'm going to control you. You wouldn't go on a second date, would you? No. So they're very charming. And then the control begins very slowly. You don't realize it. Why are you going with your friends this weekend? He used to support your relationship with your friends. Now he doesn't. Why are you wearing a short skirt? Why are you going to work, so early in the morning and getting home so late? So it's very subtle. And the next thing you know, you have that investment in the relationship. Now there's emotions and feelings, maybe children. Maybe you've got a connection that you're really strong about. And it's really hard to walk away from that. And I really feel, people ask me very often, and I don't even like the question, why do women stay?
That's the question, right?
It really, I don't think
it's offensive.
It really is offensive, and I don't like it. But I want to address it because I think the question should be, why does he batter? Why does he do what he does? Not why she stays. And the reason I say that is because I realized throughout the years there's 3 common reasons that I've seen. One of them is lack of support and resources. 2 is the hope of change. We all want the relationship to continue, but in a healthy way. We don't want it to be abusive, so the hope that it's going to change might keep us another week and another week. But then the fear of retaliation settles in. So now you have the lack of support, the hope to change, and the fear of retaliation. So, yeah, a lot of women victims, they stay. Not because they like it. I want to throw that out. Not because they're weak. I have to say survivors are strong. They survive every single day. They get up in the morning, they go to work, they take care of their children, they hold a job together. They deal with DCF sometimes, they deal with the court, criminal, throw in immigration issues. So there's a lot going on. And the dynamics, as I see the patterns, is the charm, the emotional abuse that goes into the physical. Although I've seen relationships that start with the physical.
Yeah, right out of the gate.
Immediately, it's
right
physical abuse. And there's no respite in between. It's usually just abuse. And there's others that never touch the victim and survivor.
Right.
Just the look.
Yeah, or it's that control, financial or whatever kind of control it is. It's an issue of control.
Absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that. There's many types of abuse. There's control, emotional, financial, sexual abuse. I think the most common that I've seen, however, is the emotional abuse.
I was going to say, and something I learned was lockout. And that's another form of abuse. And so that emotional and that trauma, because you're like, you don't understand. And who do you tell? Because you can't, because there's a golden rule. You don't want to break the golden rule.
And there's fear, too. Like, leaving isn't always the safest choice, right? And how do you negotiate that? Because you really have to have a plan.
Mm-hmm. When I started doing this work a long time ago, I thought I was going to come in, convince every survivor to leave, come to the safe house, and everything was going to be great.
Yeah.
I learned very quickly that was not my choice to make. And there is a lot of consequences that can come with that. The answer to leave is not always the answer to be safe in that moment. There's a lot of safety planning that you can do. We work with many survivors that call us and they don't want to leave yet. They're not ready. Remember, they want the violence to end. They don't want the relationship to end. So sometimes that hope, they stay. But there's a lot of situations where the choice for family members or friends, they think that calling the police is going to do it. Getting a restraining order is going to do it. And I wanted to mention very quickly that the number one reason for lethality in domestic violence is when they're trying to leave. When I have a survivor that I'm working with and she said, I'm going to tell him I'm leaving. I said, no, don't do that. Let's do some safety planning before you do that. Because that feeling of I'm losing control over you can turn into I'm going to punish you for leaving. And that can turn into a lethality situation. So it's not always the answer to call the cops. You're going to be okay. Get a divorce, that you're going to be okay. There's got to be other dynamics that go into that. Safety planning, support. So you can do that safely. Because leaving is not always the answer to safety. Safety planning is the answer to safety. And that can happen when you're in the relationship and when you leave the relationship.
It's a complicated situation. And I think when you're in the court system, right, and you're asking for restraining orders, that can be scary too. Is that always the best answer? Or protective orders, are they always the best answer? Or can that even instigate retaliation?
They can instigate retaliation because you're now challenging their control. And, what I find very often is that, and this is something that I've learned because of my experience, is that when a survivor leaves the situation, a lot of times the abuser has gotten her back so many times. Statistically, over 10 times it takes for a victim to actually leave and not come back. Because every time they leave, they're trying to just sort of make that a little bit better. So when that happens, I think very often they have that hope that I'm going to talk her into coming back. She's going to come back. I'm going to go to counseling. She's going to be coming back. When they realize they're not coming back, that turns from wanting her back to punishing her for leaving. And that is when it becomes very, very dangerous.
Very dangerous. And that's the other scary part going to court. I feel like they get re-victimized when they have to go into court and see their abuser. But is it also taking some power back? Did that happen to you, Jane? Did you feel powerful when you did get to go to court and face him?
I did, because it was accountability, and now he's accountable. And just to go along with what she said, you really need to have a plan, because the day he got arrested, I was trying to get into my car to leave. And that's when it happened. You need to have, you just have to think, you have to be 5 steps ahead of them. Not 1, 5, maybe more. But accountability is what gave me ease. And over time going to the court system, I almost had to act like he wasn't there. I mean, just look at my lawyer, look at the victim's advocate, and that was it.
And I want to add to that. Sometimes when you talk to survivors and you talk about options, there's a lot of different responses that you might have depending on where they're at. I've gotten survivors who said, I want to leave right now. I'm going into the safe house. I've worked with survivors for 3 or 4 years trying to work a plan into what they're going to do.
Yeah.
Are they going to leave? Are they going to get divorced? I worked with another victim for 3 years until she finally said, I'm filing the divorce. And I remember meeting with her, and I laughed a little bit because every time I met with her, we went over the same information over and over again for about 3 years. But she just wasn't ready, for those 3 years. So that decision is not, again, for us to make or us to push a victim into doing anything she doesn't want, because survivor know the situation so much better than we do, and we have to trust that. So if a victim says to me, and I really hate to use the word victim, it's out of a habit. Working in the system.
Well, in the system, yeah. And I think that's interesting. Like, maybe that will be another legislative push. I know that you guys do a lot of advocacy in the legislature. Maybe you can get the language changed to survivor.
Absolutely. And as you move around, they also, perpetrator, abuser, offender. But again, I want to say that choice to do anything in the relationship, it's up to the survivor to make, not to us for making, because the consequences are big. I also want to add around consequences. There's a lot of consequences that can happen. Every system nowadays has some kind of process around domestic violence. When I first started working, there wasn't nothing. I mean, we're talking 35 years ago.
Right.
So there was really nothing. The police, to be honest, would take the individuals out for a walk and bring them back home. There really wasn't that many arrests around domestic violence back in the day when I started. Now there's domestic violence units in almost every police department, at probation, in the courts, within the DV program. So the domestic violence unit is just a recognition that there's something that we need to be doing more than just, that arrest.
And there's police are getting educated too, because I know a lot of people, there's dual arrests. Are they effective? Are they not effective? And are there laws in place that are starting to change those?
I was actually thinking about that on the way here. When I first started doing the work, it was pretty typical of a dual arrest. There weren't too many questions asked. When they couldn't figure out the situation, they would just arrest everybody, thinking that they would be taken care of in court. The problem with that is that if you have a survivor calling the police maybe for the first time to get help, and now you get arrested, what are the chances of her calling again?
Yeah, exactly.
Because you're fearful that that's going to happen. So it's a huge deterrent for victims to seek help when they need it, and that's something that can turn lethal. To me, that's the biggest consequence of the dual arrest. The other thing is with a dual arrest is that when you make a dual arrest, you have two victims and two defendants. Mm-hmm. So when the case gets to the court process, you're dealing with two victims, two defendants. It's sort of a lose-lose in a way because you have a victim who got arrested and you have now an abuser who might get services. Mm-hmm. And the prosecutors, when I work with them closely, they try to figure things out and they do the best that they can. But sometimes abusers can be very convincing, and sometimes I think they drive the process a little bit with the manipulation in court and the lying, and I didn't do it. It's all her fault. She's crazy. She's an alcoholic. She's cheating on me. And it becomes about, justifiable violence, which is something that we don't want to hear. And we have awesome prosecutors in Hartford and all over the state. We have awesome judges across the state. I have to say that, there's really good people doing the work, but there's others who don't sometimes get it, not because maybe they don't care. Maybe they don't have the education. Maybe they don't have the open mind they need to have. But I have to say that accountability in the process, criminal and family court, it takes more than an individual. I think it takes law enforcement and the prosecutors and the victim advocates and the attorneys to really work together.
I'm glad that you mentioned that because there's a friend of mine who is a police officer, and I was talking to many amazing friends that were helping try to guide. They couldn't make the decision for me, but I called her and I said, hypothetically speaking, never said it was me, what are the chances that he will change? He'll get better. He'll get therapy. And she said, so, how's it going? And I said, what do you mean? She's like, come on. And she said, yours is classic. It's gone from verbal to physical to monitoring where you go to, and so I think at the end of the day, the police having more and more education on it helps the survivors, helps the victims become survivors.
Did you have to go through a dual arrest, and what was that like?
Well, it was awful because I remember that day without going into detail, and I ended up pushing a couple of days later, and I said, he really should have been arrested. My mom was not too far away. She knew what had gone on. She was upset. She was like, oh my gosh, I feel like my mother felt like she was reliving her life when she was dealing with it. And I remember going into the police station and they said we had to do a dual arrest. But I want you to know we arrested him first because we know he's going to hurt you and we don't want him to hurt you. And now, like she had mentioned, they use it to say, well, if you want me to let you go, then you've got to let me go. And so they know how to manipulate the system. And that's trying and that's stressful because, you think you're doing the right thing and you try to push, you have that voice. You're like, I'm going to let the cops know now. And that voice goes, sorry, you're both dual.
And with law enforcement, I also want to throw out there that the great officers that do a great job.
Sure yeah.
They really are amazing. And sometimes they walk into a situation when there's just some chaos going on and fear and just a lot going on. So I think they have to make a decision quickly. So I can see sometimes a dual arrest happening. So I think the primary aggressor laws were really, really something that was needed to happen. As a matter of fact, if they can figure out who the primary aggressor is, they can actually write a report to the prosecutor before they make an arrest to figure that out. And if the prosecutor can say, you know what, I think this person's the aggressor, they can go back and file a warrant for that person. That was not in place back in the day.
And that's what was in my favor is the police officer said, listen, we're going to write something to the judge. And so we went to the judge immediately, like, you're going to get granted, a full restraining order. He needs to stay there and you can stay in your home. And that was very critical. That was very important. And in my instance, because another form of abuse is finances. So they'll take your money. And I remember I said to my mom, I can't believe this happened. How can I afford an attorney now that he's done this? And she said, I have had this for you. She said, I've been you. She says, Grandma did this for me. I'm doing this for you. She says, but I need you to break this. I need you to break what's happening and don't let it ever happen again as a promise. And that made me think of like Jane Doe no more. and how we can get more voice elevating so that we can stop this from continuing to happen.
You heard me explain what Connecticut Paid Leave offers, up to 12 days of income replacement, and appearing in criminal or civil court is one of the reasons to get Connecticut Paid Leave. How important is a program like this while you're navigating the court system? And if you don't have an employer who will be kind enough to give you time off for this instance, how important are these services?
Amazing. I have known survivors throughout the years that have lost their jobs because of so many court dates. We have advocates that will advocate on your behalf throughout the systems, but there's very often times that victims have to come to court. Most of the system's response to domestic violence survivors sometimes is not the right one. So if you're involved in a family court case divorce, that sometimes could be continuance after continuance after continuance. When you walk into a family court for anything, you might be there from 9 o'clock until 5 o'clock. That's 7 hours for the day. If you do that 4 times a month, so it can be very overwhelming when it comes to time. The criminal court process as well, even if you do housing. So the time required to be in court sometimes is something that you have no control over, that you have to be there. If you want to have an outcome that you want, participation, it's important. So what happens is that you might have an employee who might be sensitive to your issue and say, okay, you can take a couple of hours off. And you have employers who maybe want to be but just can't. So when you miss a few days from work, your job is in jeopardy. Now you have a survivor who's not just worried now about the domestic violence, the court process, now I can lose my job. So that person navigating the system, having those concerns behind, sort of in their brain, thinking about it is very stressful. It adds to their fear. It adds to sometimes their safety plan, because my safety plan is to maybe, talk to my employer and be out for the day. And maybe I was told no, and now my safety plan has to change. So it is crucial for the public to know about the paid leave, and I think it's a great option for survivors to have.
And it's great too because it's flexible, right? So you can take it in a block.
Absolutely.
You can take it as a day, or if you are going just for the afternoon, you can take a few hours. It's intermittent or it's reduced schedule. There's a flexibility with time, so you don't have to take it all at one block. That's
great.
So you can go. Mm-hmm. And listen, we all wish that it was more than 12 days, right? But at 12 days can really make the difference of keeping your job or losing your job.
Absolutely.
Like you said.
I think it's a great option.
It's life-saving, literally, because in a financial perspective, because you're constantly thinking of every bill, every dollar, everything. And to know you have that as an alternate resource, that if for some reason you exhaust your vacation time, your personal time off. I mean, I look at my situation where I've been in court 3 or 4 times a week. This is very helpful. It's very beneficial to myself and others.
Give me some advice, Jane. What advice would you give women who might be listening and just in the beginning of it?
1, you're not the problem.
Mm-hmm.
2, there are resources. 3, you will be able to get through this. And 4, you're not alone. The 5th one I would say is forgive yourself. Because sometimes we hold this accountability and we have to forgive ourselves. Everyone's like, well, forgive that person. And no, forgive yourself. And then move forward.
Yeah. If I can add to that, I think one of the things that I've heard throughout the years with the people I've worked with is that there's a certain feeling of, if I have done something different.
Right, it's my fault. I'm guilty.
My fault.
I could if I only did something different.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If I had just come home earlier from work, that would have happened. And usually what happens is it's not just once, it's often. And I've seen many survivors go into a relationship feeling very confident, good about themselves. And when you hear every day, you're no good, you're worthless, you start to feel and believe that, and you feel less powerful. And I really, really love what you said. You have to love yourself. It isn't your fault. Violence in general is never justified in any situation. Not just in a family violence situation. You can't go around hitting and abusing people. So you have to realize that it's not something that you should do. And I also want to say that there are services available for people who are abusive. If abusers continue to abuse and be violent, there's always going to be that need for services, and we're always going to have survivors, people being hurt. So I think that if you're out there and you're listening to this and you feel that you're somebody who is being abusive or controlling, get help. There is help out there as well, so that you are able to stop that, that behavior. But for victims of domestic violence and survivors, I think that you're strong, you're amazing, it's not your fault, and you're right, you will get through this.
Jennifer Lopez, the Director of Court Advocacy Programs for Interval House, thank you so much for your expertise with the court systems. You do such important work. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
And I wish you the very best, Jane. I hope you get stronger and stronger every day in your recovery, and good luck with your continued court cases.
Thank you.
If you know someone who is a victim of family or intimate partner violence, here is the statewide 24-hour toll-free number to call to talk to someone or just to get some help. In English, you can call 888-774-2900. And for Spanish, you can call 844-831-9200. If you are in danger, please call 911. For information about Interval House, you can go to intervalhousect.org or call 860-246-9149. For information or to apply for benefits, go to ctpaidleave.org. This has been another edition of the Paid Leave Podcast. Please like and subscribe so you'll be notified about new podcasts that become available. Connecticut Paid Leave is a public act with a personal purpose. I'm Nancy Barrow, and thanks for listening.